The quiet stretch of Pine Hollow, Colorado, had its own kind of peace, a silence that settled between the pines like old secrets. Out here, you could hear the wind whisper through 10 acres of stillness, the kind that made you forget the world even existed. For Jake Weston, that silence was more than comfort. It was control. Predictable, uninterrupted, safe, until the day it wasn't. When Jake turned onto his gravel driveway that afternoon, expecting nothing but the hum of the wind, he found chaos instead. 3 men in neon vests trying to pry open his garage door like pirates cracking a treasure chest. One had a crowbar. Another clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon. The third, filming it all with his phone, grinning like an idiot. Jake's first thought wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Then something colder, amusement. Because these weren't ordinary trespassers, they were pretending to be HOA inspectors. And that was when he realized this wasn't just a break-in, this was war. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to HOA Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Jake eased his truck to a stomp. The men didn't notice him, too busy whispers shouting at each other, arguing over leverage. He stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. "Hey fellas," he called, voice calm but carrying. "You holding a matinee performance or the evening show?" They froze. The tall one with the crowbar, a shiny hard hat still wearing a store tag, looked up like he'd just been caught stealing communion wine. Clipboard. Guy swallowed hard. Phone guy blinked, slowly lowering his camera. Then Jake's security drone whirred above them, motion triggered, lens glinting in the light. The 3 men stiffened. Jake folded his arms. "You've got 15 seconds to explain why you're breaking into my garage without permission, paperwork, or a single functioning brain cell." Clipboard guy stammered. "Sir, this is a routine HOA inspection, just—" Jake raised a hand. "Stop before you hurt yourself with that sentence." But crowbar guy wasn't done being stupid. He shifted his stance, lifted the tool slightly, not enough for a fight, but enough to cross a line. Jake sighed. Wrong move. He closed the distance in 2 steps, hooked the man's wrist, twisted, and sent him sprawling. The crowbar hit the ground with a satisfying clatter. Clipboard guy panicked and lunged, tripped over his own boots, hit the dirt. Phone guy tried to bolt but met a shovel handle to the shin. Gravity did the rest. In under a minute, all 3 were on the ground, groaning. Jake grabbed heavy-duty zip ties from his truck and bound their wrists, firm but not cruel. Old instincts from his law enforcement days still came easy. "Relax," Jake muttered. The gravel did most of the work. Then came the confession. Between gasps, phone guy whimpered. "Karen said this was authorized. She said he keeps dangerous stuff in there." Ah, there it was. The name, Karen Littleton, self-appointed queen of the Pine Hollow, HOA. A woman whose ego could power a small city. Jake chuckled darkly. "Figures." He called the sheriff. "Hey, Bell. Got 3 intruders, zip-tied on my property. 1 with a crowbar, all wearing fake HOA vests." Sheriff Bell arrived 8 minutes later, lights spinning slow across the pines. He stepped out, surveyed the scene, and sighed like a man who'd seen too much stupidity for one lifetime. "Afternoon went sideways, huh, Jake?" Jake shrugged. "They ruined the quiet part." Bell examined the trespassers. "Anyone hurt?" "Just their pride." Clipboard guy tried to sit up. "Sheriff, this was an authorized inspection. We got reports of hazardous materials, chemicals, fumes, maybe explosives." Bell stared at him flatly. "Explosives? That's what she told us," the man mumbled. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sheriff, the most dangerous thing in that garage is an old shop vac." Then, as if summoned by sheer arrogance, came the click of high heels over gravel. Karen Littleton emerged from the trees like an angry monarch, folder in hand, sunglasses oversized enough to block sunlight and accountability. "Sheriff Bell," she snapped, "you need to stop this arrest immediately. These men were authorized personnel acting under HOA directive. Bell didn't flinch. "Ma'am, they broke into a private structure. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." "That's incorrect," she barked, waving a freshly printed map. According to zoning proposals from 2019, this property was meant to be included in Pine Hollow's jurisdiction. Jake smirked. "Drawing lines on a PDF doesn't make it yours, Karen." The deputies chuckled under their breath. Karen bristled. There had been reports, fumes, strange noises, hazardous materials. "From the ground," phone guy muttered. "She told us it might be a meth lab." Karen's face went white. That was internal speculation. Bell stepped between them. "Ma'am, you orchestrated an unlawful entry. Take one more step toward that garage, and you're going on the report with them." Silence fell. Jake folded his arms. "Save your breath, Karen. You'll need it for the deposition." The sheriff's deputies loaded her inspection team into the cruiser. The driveway went still again, except for Karen, standing frozen, folder trembling. Beneath her anger, Jake saw something else. Fear. Not fear of arrest, fear of losing control. That was when he realized this wasn't about safety. It was about territory. Karen didn't want justice. She wanted his land. It had started months earlier when Jake began renovating his garage. Solar batteries, new wiring, a fire suppression system. Normal stuff for an off-grid tech guy. But Karen's curiosity turned to obsession. She started whispering at HOA meetings, claiming his setup was dangerous. Hazardous materials, fumes, unstable power storage. Soon, neighbors stopped waving. Parents hurried their kids past his fence. Then came the safety memo from the HOA. Report any unusual smells, lighting, or suspicious equipment near boundary lots. Everyone knew which boundary lot she meant. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was poisoning it. Jake had laughed it off. Until now. Until 3 idiots in store tag vests tried to break into his workshop under her orders. Karen's endgame became clear that day. She wanted to force an emergency intervention the HOA could use to push for expansion. His land was prime real estate. If she could prove a public hazard, she might convince the county to absorb his property into HOA control. But she miscalculated. Jake wasn't a recluse with a secret. He was a former tactical specialist who understood one thing better than anyone in Pine Hollow: escalation. As Sheriff Bell's cruiser rolled away, Karen glared at Jake one last time. It wasn't the look of someone defeated. It was the look of someone promising revenge. He watched her disappear down the road and muttered, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." That night, the wind over the pines returned to its usual rhythm, but it didn't sound peaceful anymore. It sounded like a warning, because Karen Littleton had just declared war, and Jake Weston never lost a war. The pines went still after the arrests, but the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like a breath being held. Jake could sense it in the way the wind slid over the needles and hesitated, like even the air was waiting for the next move. He spent the evening checking door sensors, resetting drone patrol routes, and tightening the routines that kept his off-grid life clean and predictable. He slept, but only the kind of sleep that comes in shallow layers. Old instincts never die. They settle into the bones and wait for the sound of gravel under unfamiliar tires. 2 days passed. Then a white sport utility vehicle appeared just beyond his southern fence line. No plates on the front. Tinted windows. 2 figures stepped out. Not locals, not curious neighbors. They didn't wave. They didn't call out. They aimed lenses at the roofline, the solar array, the garage wall. Snap, snap, snap. They stood there for 10 minutes and left without a word. Jake watched them go and felt that old, cold tickle at the base of his neck. Someone was probing, looking for soft spots that didn't exist. On the 4th day, an envelope arrived with a heavy seal and an official tone. The letterhead read, "Colorado Department of Environmental Health." It accused Jake of non-compliant emissions, improper storage of hazardous materials, and potential electrical feedback anomalies. It was nonsense wrapped in bureaucracy, the kind of document designed to make an honest man feel guilty just for breathing. Jake exhaled slowly and set water to boil for coffee. He wasn't rattled. He was certain. This wasn't the state paying attention on its own. This was Karen pulling strings she didn't understand. A week later, the inspector came. A courteous woman near 50, polite, efficient, quietly embarrassed to be there. Jake walked her through every system: the battery bank, fire suppression, runoff trenches, conduit, the server racks, the fault sensors, even the placement of the shop vac that now felt like a running joke. She checked, took photos, made notes. After half an hour, she closed her binder and gave him a look he recognized from years of reading people at first glance. "I'm not sure who filed this complaint," she said, "but everything here is immaculate." Jake nodded. "I know who filed it. And I know why." She didn't ask for details. Good judgment. She left with a quiet apology Jake didn't require. He watched her car disappear beyond the bend and stood in the silence a long time, listening to the soft hum of his systems. The quiet still wasn't peace. It was pressure. Then the envelope started showing up around Pine Hollow. Not in his mailbox, in everyone else's. Cream paper, no return address. Inside each was a grainy night photo of his workshop, zoomed too far, all shadows and implication. Below the image, a single typed sentence: "Do you know what's being stored near your homes?" No signature. Just fear, prepackaged and mailed. Neighbors adjusted in small ways. A family that used to let their kids ride bikes down his gravel stretch suddenly took the long way around. Children walking their bikes, eyes down, no wave. A jogger who used to stop to pet Jake's dog kept running without breaking stride. That's how rumor moves. It does not need proof, only momentum. Flyers followed. They appeared in mail slots and on community boards under the HOA crest. Karen loved to flash like a badge. Same photos, now paired with vague language that sounded official without saying anything at all. Possible unlicensed chemicals, electrical anomalies near boundary zones, reports of hazardous equipment. The words were foggy by design. You can't challenge fog. Then came the video. It surfaced in the neighborhood Facebook group with a headline that rattled like a bottle of pills. "Disturbing confrontation caught on camera. Pine Hollow residents beware." The thumbnail froze Jake mid-motion, jaw taut, shoulders squared. The kind of accidental freeze frame that makes anyone look like a villain. The video itself had been carefully sliced. The illegal entry was gone. The crowbar, the store tag vests, the whispered panic, gone. What remained was a neatly edited sequence of Jake disarming 3 men and zip-tying their wrists, paired with a low, grainy voiceover saying, "Come back again, and there will be consequences." He had never said those words. But the audio was synced badly to the movement of his jaw, just believable enough to a crowd already addled by fear. Comments exploded. "He's dangerous. I heard he used to be military. Why does he have all that equipment? Prepper for sure." Someone else chimed in. "I smell something at night sometimes. Maybe that's him." Jake traced the upload. Fresh account, no friends, no history. But whoever posted it made one sloppy mistake. The proxy bounce moved through a dorm network at a state university. Colorado State University Pueblo. The same campus where Karen's son, Tyler Littleton, spent more time skateboarding than studying. The same kid who had filmed the attempted break-in while his buddies fumbled the crowbar. Family business then. Karen hadn't just escalated, she had enlisted. The drones arrived at dusk 2 evenings later. Not Jake's drone. Those flew quiet and steady, smooth as a hawk's glide. These were cheap and twitchy, piloted like toys. They buzzed in low over the western fence line, hovered for a nervous minute, and skittered away the moment Jake launched his own. Twice they fled south in a clumsy panic. Back in the workshop, his firewall logs told a parallel story. 5 pings one night, 10 the next, then 20. Tiny, persistent probes nibbling at the network perimeter. Not sophisticated, not state-level, off-the-shelf rented nonsense. Amateur hour with a timer. Jake stared at the logs and didn't feel threatened. He felt bored. He had spent nearly a decade in rapid deployment units dealing with cyber-physical incidents, training people how to harden perimeters the way you harden your knuckles. This was not a siege. This was a kid who had discovered a how-to form and a debit card. He mapped the pulses. He tracked the heartbeat interval of the botnet controller. Every criminal leaves a rhythm behind, and Tyler's rhythm was the digital equivalent of a drunk woodpecker. Click. Attack. Panic. Stop. New virtual private network. Try again. Amateur camouflage. Professionals know VPNs make amateurs confident, not invisible. Jake packaged a sanitized evidence bundle. Timestamps, flow logs, packet captures, malware signatures, and made a call, not to the sheriff. To an old colleague now consulting with federal cyber units, a man who hated drama and loved facts. Hypothetically, Jake said, someone poked my fence. I poked back. His friend asked for an hour. He called back in 20 minutes. The tone of his voice had changed. This botnet is already under federal surveillance, he said. Credit card skimming, ransomware drops, crypto laundering. Whoever rented it in your backyard stepped into an investigation with a blinking sign over their head. So if a university dorm IP shows up in that traffic, Jake said, what happens next? We escalate. Quietly, send me the unredacted set. By the next afternoon, a few gears had started to turn. The local cyber task force opened a preliminary case file. A federal agent contacted the university's information technology department for logs tied to several devices on Tyler's floor. None of it public, all of it consequential. Once certain machines start up, they do not stop for anyone's lawn signs. While the paperwork warmed, Pine Hollow continued its nervous spiral. The edited video spread. The flyers multiplied. The HOA Facebook page became an echo chamber of suspicion. Karen thought she was tightening a noose. She hadn't felt the rope curl around her own wrists yet. A week later, just after daybreak, Pine Hollow learned the difference between rumor and consequence. The knock came at 6 o'clock and 2 minutes in the morning. Not on Jake's door, on Karen's. Federal vehicles idled in front of her manicured lawn while neighbors peered through blinds and pretended they weren't. Agents carried evidence boxes down the steps, steady, unhurried. Tyler sat on the curb, hands clasped, head low, a college kid who had just learned that the internet leaves footprints with steel toes. Jake stood on his porch with a mug of coffee and did not smile. Justice should not taste sweet. Accountability can, but this wasn't that either. This was gravity, acting on a mass that had been defying it for far too long. By 7 o'clock, the private neighborhood group had transformed into a siren. Is it a raid? I saw them take computers. Someone said they grabbed HOA files. Karen paced the lawn in a beige sweater, hair tied in a tight knot, fury traded for disbelief. At 7:40, a whispered audio clip surfaced. They told her, "Not today, you're not," when she insisted she was the HOA president. Pine Hollow inhaled sharply and didn't exhale. Around 8, Raymond Brewer, the HOA treasurer, pulled into Jake's drive. He didn't shut off the engine before climbing out. He looked like a man who had slept in a chair. Jake handed him a coffee. "They questioned me," Raymond said, voice thin. "About charges I never approved. Charges on the HOA card." He unfolded a printout with shaking hands. Payments to an Arizona marketing firm, the people behind the flyers, and another $5,000 to a company the agents say is a processor for botnet rentals. Jake said nothing. Let him arrive at the truth on his own. Raymond stared at the paper like it might change its mind if he glared hard enough. "She used the HOA card," he said. "She funded a cyber attack with community money." By noon, a closed-door emergency meeting of the board began. But nothing in Pine Hollow stayed closed anymore. 20 minutes later, a resident forwarded Jake the full audio. It was chaos from the first second. "This is retaliatory," Karen insisted. "They're twisting everything. I was protecting this community." "You forged signatures," Elena from community events snapped. "You labeled it digital outreach. You hired a smear shop. You paid criminals." "That's embezzlement," another voice added. "And wire fraud." Raymond's tone hardened into something Jake hadn't heard from him before. "You tied every homeowner in this neighborhood to federal cybercrime, Karen. Every one of us is now part of a case number because you couldn't stand not being obeyed." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. "I move for a vote of no confidence," Elena said, steady as bedrock. No debate. Hands raised. 10 votes, none against. Karen Littleton, removed. Not suspended, removed. The meeting dissolved into scraping chairs and muffled sobs. Pine Hollow stepped outside and realized the crown had been paper all along. The sign at the community entrance, the one Karen insisted be repainted every spring, leaned crooked on a single bracket by evening. No one rushed to fix it. At dusk, Jake sat on the porch steps and listened to the crickets test their choir. The fight had changed shape. It was no longer neighbor against neighbor, rumor against denial, board against boundary. It was evidence against ego. The law had taken the burden from his shoulders and placed it on scales built to carry it. That night, he opened the shop, brewed a pot strong enough to stand a spoon, and did what had always steadied him. He organized the truth. He labeled video files and synced camera timestamps, cataloged firewall logs, mapped drone sightings, printed sworn statements, and tucked everything into color-coded binders. Even he could navigate in the dark. He wasn't hoarding proof. He was making a gift of clarity for anyone with the authority to use it. The call came the next morning from the assistant district attorney, a woman whose voice moved like a metronome. She wanted a statement. She asked for logs and recordings. She said the words "federal partners." Jake agreed and marked the hour in his notebook because writing things down is a kind of armor. In the conference room, the assistant district attorney laid out 3 threads like lines on a whiteboard: cyber intrusion using a monitored botnet, financial misconduct inside the HOA, coordinated harassment through falsified media, and unauthorized surveillance. All 3, she said, trace back to Karen Littleton and her son Tyler. "Tyler has retained counsel," she added, "and he's talking." Jake nodded once. He didn't feel joy. He felt relief, the kind that unfurls slowly through the lungs. By late afternoon, Pine Hollow had shifted again. Half the board resigned. HOA dues were temporarily frozen. The newsletter was suspended. People who had once repeated Karen's phrases started asking different questions, ones that sounded like curiosity instead of obedience. Accountability moves quieter than gossip, but it moves farther. As the sun slid down the backs of the pines, Jake walked to the edge of his property and rested a hand on the fence post. The wind had its old cadence again. Not a held breath, not a warning. Something cleaner. He knew better than to call it peace. But it was closer than anything he had heard in months. He went back inside, set his drone routes, and shut off the lights. Somewhere beyond the trees, the slow wheels of consequence kept turning, patient as winter. And for the first time since the day he turned into his driveway and found 3 men playing inspector with a crowbar, Jake Weston allowed himself a rare luxury. He trusted the quiet. Federal courtrooms don't hum like local ones. They vibrate with something quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that feels like gravity itself. When Jake Weston stepped through the double doors of the Denver Federal District Courthouse, he could feel that weight settle into his shoulders. No gossipers this time, no nosy neighbors pretending to care about community safety. Just law, consequence, and the slow hum of air conditioning that smelled faintly of judgment. Karen Littleton sat at the defense table, beige suit swallowing her frame, hair pulled into a nervous knot. Gone was the polished queen of Pine Hollow. The woman in front of him looked like someone stripped of her armor, forced to face the truth she spent her whole life dodging. Beside her sat two attorneys, one whispering, the other staring into the middle distance like he regretted every choice that led him here. Behind her, Tyler Littleton hunched small in his chair, hands clasped tight, no eye contact with anyone, especially not his mother. When the judge entered, the air went cold. "This court is convened for the arraignment of Mrs. Escourt, Karen Littleton," announced the bailiff. "Charges include wire fraud, conspiracy to commit digital harassment, embezzlement of HOA funds, cyber intrusion through illicit botnet, unauthorized surveillance of a private citizen, and violation of federal network security policy." The words hung heavy, one after another, like hammer strikes. Karen trembled. Jake studied her face, not out of cruelty, but curiosity. He wanted to see if she still believed she could talk her way out of this. She couldn't. The mountain of evidence was taller than her pride. The prosecution moved fast. They played security footage from Jake's drone, showed the forged reimbursement forms, displayed HOA card statements leading straight to the Arizona marketing firm and the botnet vendor. Then came the emails. The jury read them projected 10 feet high, make people scared of him. Spin it however you need. Karen flinched. Her own words turned into iron bars. When the prosecutor called Tyler to the stand, a quiet murmur ran through the room. Jake watched the boy shuffle forward, shoulders slumped like the world was balancing on them. Tyler's voice barely reached the microphone. "She told me to help her," he said. "She said, if I loved her, I'd take care of the online stuff. I didn't know it was illegal." "Did you edit the video of Mr. Racken Weston?" the prosecutor asked. Tyler nodded. "Yes." "Did you rent the botnet used to attack his network?" He hesitated. Then, "Yes." "And who paid for it?" A long pause, then a whisper. "She did." "My mom, with the HOA card." Karen gasped like she'd been stabbed. Her lawyer's hand clamped over her wrist. The courtroom rippled with quiet shock. Even Jake felt it. Not victory, not satisfaction, just the full, cold shape of truth filling the room. The prosecutor ended with one sentence. This was not a misunderstanding. It was an organized campaign of harassment designed to destroy a man's reputation and seize his land. Karen's attorneys tried to argue mental stress, confusion, misplaced authority, but the evidence spoke louder than excuses. When the verdict came, Judge Dwyer's voice was calm, clipped, unshakable. "The court finds Mrs. Reese, Karen Littleton, guilty on all primary counts. Sentencing to be determined following restitution review." Karen didn't collapse. She deflated. The air left her body, and all that remained was the echo of someone who thought power made them untouchable. Tyler wept silently. Jake sat still. The gavel fell. Months passed. Pine Hollow changed in ways Jake never expected. The sign at the subdivision entrance still leaned crooked, but this time it wasn't neglect. It was symbolic. Residents stopped whispering and started listening. The HOA board dissolved, rebuilt, and under Raymond Brewer's new leadership, everything that once hid behind policy was dragged into the sunlight. Financial records were audited, bylaws rewritten, term limits introduced, transparency enforced. Meetings that used to feel like coronations turned into real conversations. Jake even showed up to one, standing at the back, arms crossed. When the room fell quiet, Raymond called on him. "Mr. Weston," he said, "you've seen where blind power gets us. Any advice for making sure we don't end up there again?" Jake thought for a moment. "Yeah. Stop electing people who want control. Start electing people who want peace." There were chuckles, but thoughtful ones. Someone wrote it down. By spring, Pine Hollow looked like a community again. The gossip had faded into memory, replaced by barbecues, dog walks, and the occasional curious question shouted from across the road. "Hey Jake, how's the garage project going?" He'd smile. "Still not a meth lab." The real surprise came later, when messages began arriving from beyond Pine Hollow. Emails from homeowners across the country, people caught in the same traps, HOAs weaponized by ego, authority abused by amateurs with titles. They'd found his story through whispers online and local press coverage. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to be heard. Jake wasn't a man of speeches, but he was a man of systems. So he built one. A microphone, a small soundproof booth in his workshop, and a name, Off the Grid, True Tales of HOA Hell. He recorded late at night, his voice steady, the tone part confessional, part warning. The first episode was his own story, how a rumor became a war and how truth outlasted noise. The next episode featured a couple from Texas whose HOA fined them for growing tomatoes in their front yard. The one after that, a retired teacher who lost her home to board corruption. By the third month, the podcast was charting in the top 10 for legal commentary. A lawyer from Austin offered to co-host a segment on homeowner rights. A production studio emailed about a potential docuseries. But Jake didn't care about fame. He cared about helping people learn what Karen never did, that authority without accountability is just another word for tyranny. His land stayed quiet. The solar panels hummed. The wind carried clean through the pines again. No more drones, no more letters, no more fluorescent vests pretending to be badges, just silence, honest and earned. He installed one last thing by the gate, a sleek black and gold sign that read, "Curious about my garage? File an official request." Or, "Ask Karen's lawyer." Every time he saw it, he smiled. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Some scars deserve to be visible. Karen served her sentence quietly. 18 months probation, community service, 5-year ban from any homeowners association. She moved 2 towns away into a rental with no board, no newsletter, no power. Locals said she walked with her head down at the grocery store. Jake never saw her again. He didn't need to. The story was already written, filed, and finished. Tyler disappeared from public life too. Started a landscaping business somewhere in New Mexico. One day, Jake found an email from him, an apology written in plain words, full of regret but no excuses. Jake read it twice and never replied. Forgiveness, he'd learned, isn't something you give out loud. It's something you practice quietly by moving on. A year after the trial, the podcast passed 1 million downloads. Letters poured in, not fan mail, but gratitude. Stories from people who finally stood up to their boards, from veterans who reclaimed their property rights, from widows who found the courage to fight back against harassment. Jake read every one. Some nights he laughed. Others, he just sat in silence, coffee cooling beside him, realizing that sometimes survival becomes purpose. The HOA that once tried to break him had accidentally built his platform. Pine Hollow turned from a cautionary tale into a case study for reform. Counties across Colorado adopted new homeowner transparency laws inspired by the fallout. Reporters called him a whistleblower. He called himself lucky. On a clear evening, Jake stood on his porch as the sky faded from gold to indigo. The crickets started their choir, steady and rhythmic. He breathed deep and felt, finally, the weight lift. Peace wasn't silence. It was knowing that the noise outside could never reach the stillness you built inside. He stepped back into his workshop, brushed dust off the microphone, and hit record. His voice, calm and grounded, filled the room. "Tonight's story isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about balance, about what happens when you stop running from noise and start standing in truth. About what happens when one person decides not to be bullied by a system built on fear." He paused. Let the quiet stretch between words. If you've ever felt trapped by people who think power gives them the right to invade your peace, this one's for you. Because out here, beyond the noise, there's room for everyone to breathe again. Then, with that steady tone that had carried through fire, Jake ended the recording the same way he always did. This has been another story from Off the Grid. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to HOA Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?